Hello and welcome everyone to our third lecture in the series on the magical seals of King Solomon. In our previous lecture, we watched Solomon's seal morph into the pentaculum, or pentacles. The Clavicular Solomonis gathered scattered figures into a tidy system, equated pentacles with older candarii, and turned divine names into visible, walking signs, while writers like Calcanini and Argentine argued over what pentacle even meant, and where licit practice ended and illicit magic began. Today we will follow that story out of the ritual circle and into the street and the clinic. We'll see how pentacles slipped from demon summoning handbooks into everyday protection, medicine, and natural philosophy. How medical practitioners borrowed, contested, and rebranded them, and how this diffusion across dictionaries, case notes, and popular objects worn on the body reveals a running negotiation between fear and healing, secrecy and publicity, demons and doctors. Before we start, let me emphasize that although our next lecture will focus on the Jewish reception of this phenomenon, Jewish contributions are already visible from very early stages. It would be misleading to imagine religious boundaries as hard and clear. When it comes to magical practice and plenty of other fields, ideas and techniques move across communities all the time. Of course, those crossings can be framed polemically. Let's begin with one such case. As we saw in the previous lecture, Celio Calcanini worried that pentacle was a vulgar corruption of the sign of Antiochus, a slip born of popular misuse. We also noted how the physician Richard Argentine treated the pentacle as a demonic emblem. These reactions remind us that arguments over names and meanings were never just semantic. They were struggles over legitimacy, ownership, and the boundaries of acceptable practice. Another meaning of pentacle appears in a treatise known as De Occulta Philosophia, on the occult philosophy, in which the author exemplified how the attitudes toward Jews were sometimes used for polemics. The author signals out two principal magical seals above all characters and pentacles: an hexagram with the letters of Adonai at its 6 angles, and a pentagram bearing the 5 syllables of the tetragrammaton at its points. He still calls them characters, but elevates them as the best of the best, promising protection from enchantments and bodily harm. The method is as striking as the claim. They are to be taken orally at the proper astronomical hour by eating a cake on which the figures are inscribed. An apotropaic dose said to last about 24 hours. This, he said, is a secret of the Israelites and Jewish nigromancers, who have achieved much with it, treating this sign as potent drugs to be administered, not merely worn or drawn. Although he declines to print the figures, insisting they are to be found other places, a devoted reader of the 1591 Basel German edition sketched them in the margins and titled the page Sigilla Solomonis, that is, the seal of Solomon. Attribution to Israelites and Jewish nigromancers is doing more than naming a source. It's rhetorical staging. By linking Jewish practitioners to these pentacles, the author borrows the aura of biblical antiquity while displacing the moral risk onto a familiar outsider. It flatters efficacy, who would better know the name of God than Jews in Hebrew, right? And shields the writer's orthodoxy. More important for us is the fact that it medicalizes the practice. The seals, the pentacles, become a kind of drug to be taken by mouth. This would not be the last time pentacles surfaced in a medical setting. The Occulta Philosophia we just discussed was attributed to the Swiss physician with the very long name Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, who is better known as Paracelsus. Even though he did not write it, some of his followers treated it as is, and that attribution mattered. Once pentacle appeared under the Paracelsian umbrella, it gained currency among later iatrochemists. You might be wondering, what is an iatrochemist? In short, iatrochemists were early modern alchemists who applied their art to medicine. They pursued chemically prepared remedies timed and tuned to the stars in the hope of correcting bodily imbalances, or, when needed, to counteract harmful influences descending from the stars. Paracelsus is the most famous name associated with this movement, so anything linked to him, authentically or by reputation, carried enormous weight among his followers. One of these iatrochemists was Oswald Croll, an English court physician to Rudolf II of Habsburg, and a follower of Paracelsus. His Basilica Chemica, a highly influential handbook, later translated into English, French, and German, uses the word pentacles directly in a medical iatrochemical sense. Drawing on Paracelsian and pseudo-Paracelsian ideas, Croll treats pentacles, he also calls them amulets, that is amulets, as cues that operate through an astral mechanism. One of the most popular Paracelsian drugs was the so-called Xenexton, a term with obscure etymology, and in the Basilica Chemica, Croll gives a recipe for preparing it, explicitly identifying it as a pentacle. What do these pentacles look like in practice? So, in Croll's account, they are small discs, literally he called them little cakes, formed from a carefully compounded mass. The ingredients are as striking as they are sometimes dangerous. There are powdered dried toads, menstrual blood of young women, crystals of white arsenic, among many others ingredients, each with measured quantities and practical tips for handling. Mixed together, the mass is shaped into little cakes, amulets meant to harness astral influences and, in theory, ward off harm. But these cakes do not work on their own. Further steps are needed to, let's call it activate them. Steel tools come into play. A ring and a double-edged stamp whose larger face bears a figure of a serpent and whose smaller face bears a figure of a scorpion. The mass is packed into the ring so it won't spread during the pressing, and then impressed with the stamp, shaping it to the engraved design. Crucially, both the carving and the sealing must be done under strict astronomical conditions. Ideally, when the sun and the moon enter Scorpio, at the very least, when the moon alone is in Scorpio. The scorpion device, in other words, is not decorative. It signals the remedy's astrological logic. Then, Croll writes, and I quote, "Worn externally around the neck with a silk cord, placed over the chest area, it not only protects against the plague, but also prevents the body from being infected by poisons or astral diseases. It draws the poison from within and consumes it externally." So, in Croll's hands, the pentacle is essentially a pendant, made at elected astrological hours, meant to draw out noxious astral influences and poisons from the body. And in the Basilica Chemica, we even find variants cast in the shape of a heart. During the 17th century, the link between Xenexton and pentacles hardens in print. Iatrochemical dictionaries began to standardize the language. In David de Plany-Campy's work, published in 1646 in Paris, there is a dictionary of the most frequented and hidden words in the spagyric art, that is, iatrochemistry. In it, The Zenek stone, indeed a frequently used term among iatrochemists, appears as a, and I quote, constellated pentacle, suitable against the plague. The adjective constellated would have been obvious to anyone who knew Croll's recipe. We are dealing with objects manufactured at elected stellar hours and marked to match these hours. Direct heirs to medieval astro-magical practices. These practices, remember, do not live only in the shadows. Elements of it were taught, debated, and sometimes performed in university settings by Christians and Jews alike. Some treatises offered instructions on how to create astrological images for various purposes. Such works circulated in multiple languages and fed a long debate. Can medical images, say Leo image for kidney disease, be legitimate instruments? Everything turned on mechanism. If their efficacy flowed from natural celestial influences, some scholars could tolerate them. If it smacked of demonic mediation, others drew a hard line. The Zenek stone, the iatrochemical pentacle powered by the stars, lands exactly in the middle of that long-standing dispute. In practice, it looks and behaved like an astrological seal or image, engraved and sealed under strict timings, bearing images represented those timings, and that resemblance worried some medical practitioners. Would patients or practitioners start believing that the carved figures themselves were the cure, as in the pentacles of necromancy? Not every medical practitioner and theorist was willing to accept that. Consider, for example, the German university-trained physician Matthias Unser. In his 1614 treatise on renal stones, he asks very plainly whether such pentacles have any value against kidney stones. His answer is a polemical no. For Unser, these devices were the thin edge of a wedge, an attempt by less successful practitioners to smuggle foreign magical foolishness into the art of medicine. Unser wrote, and I quote, "Some have fallen into such madness that, after first trying every remedy of the medical art, they saw they had nevertheless accomplished absolutely nothing of value in curing kidney disease. Indeed, they had, as the saying goes, washed a brick, that is, attempted to improve what is inherently inferior, and spent their effort in vain. At last, they turned to a superstitious and magical method of treatment. They devised certain pentacles or seals, marked and inscribed with specific characters for particular positions and configurations of the heavens or planetary constellations. And, as if they are unique and secret remedies, and remedies partaking of celestial power, they later introduced this into the medical arts." In Unser's view, it's the frustrated medical practitioners, those mad enough to chase marvels, who have smuggled superstition into medicine, with pentacles as an example. He isn't condemning astral timing as such. In a work he published a year later, he leans heavily on Paracelsian ideas. What alarms him is the astral facade. Under the cover of Star Talk, he says, creeps an art, and I quote, "carried out not by its own proper power, but solely by the help and operation of demons to the ruin of humankind." This isn't just bad practice, it's a civilizational threat. Still, Unser admits that such devices might seem to work. After weighing the usual pros and cons, he lays down his verdict. If any benefit is observed, it does not come from magical characters or from the carefully tracked influence of the spheres, but it comes from natural properties in the objects, from the patient's spontaneous resolve, or from other medicines given alongside. And when he describes an effective pentacle, it's clearly a concrete compound of substances, much like Croll's little cakes, rather than a talisman powered by images or spirits. The link between the medical Xenexton and the pentacle cut both ways. On the one hand, pentacle was far more familiar than the pseudo-Paracelsian Xenexton, a handy, marketable label. On the other hand, it came with heavy baggage, whiffs of demonic practice, and even inquisitorial scrutiny. That ambivalence helps explain why Marcel de Boulenc, translating Croll's Basilica Chymica into French in 1634, scrapped the word entirely. He kept the recipes for the pentacles, but rebranded them for students and the French reading and speaking audience as simple little cakes. As we'll see, this kind of relabeling was part of a broader push by some medical practitioners to draw sharp lines between suspect pentacles and acceptable therapeutic tools. Read in that light, Richard Argentine's attack on pentacles sits in a medical marketplace where names mattered. Argentine, as remembered, was a physician himself. All through the 16th century, pentacle was entangled with necromancy. Medical practitioners, facing the term's street popularity, felt compelled to respond, either by rejecting it outright or by cleaning it up. Argentine wasn't alone. Jacques Grévin, the French physician, takes a different tack. A mini history lesson on the deceits of demonic magic. He contrasts contemporary magicians who invoke Christ with the ancient magi who called on pagan gods. Despite the different addressees, the assumed effects look strangely similar, leading him to ask, and I quote, whether those ancients, in the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, misused the consecration of fumigations, or fire and spirits exorcism, and finally the consecration of garments and the pentacle, and the conjuration of the days, as our people do? Certainly not. For they did not know him, much less the mass of the Holy Spirit from the truth, which, however, many enchanters misuse. I will say nothing of the rituals, those taught by Christians who believe themselves to rely on divine power. I remain silent about the rings, which once had widespread renown in England. I omit the enchanted garments, the sacred names, and the characters worn around the neck. I will only say that there is nothing in common between Christ and Saturn, Jupiter or Venus, or between Apollo and John, or Mercury and the Virgin Mary. Unless someone wishes to claim that the ceremonies used in incantation today originate from pagan practices, and in this one aspect they agree that they are invented to deceive the simple common people. Therefore, since the same affects proceed from contrary words, one must indeed confess that words are either of no significance or that opposing causes have the same effects, which is, however, contrary to all reason. But this is done by the works of demons, so that in this way they accommodate themselves to the diverse intellects of people, while falsely believing that what is instituted by demons is done by the will of God and the saints. Grévin fired in all directions, from the hidden chamber to the city square. He argues that today's magicians who invoke the name of Christ chase the very same affects the ancient magi sought when they called on pagan gods. For him, It's all the same demonic deception, and the fraud reaches the plebeculi, the common folk, who wear characters or strings around their necks. Notice the slide in his rhetoric. He starts by condemning the consecration of garments and pentacles, but when he circles back, pentacles have quietly become characters worn around the neck. The point is quite clear. To wear a consecrated pentacle is to participate in a demonic act. It's a polemic aimed not only at learned magicians or nigromancers, but also at the booming street trade that made such pentacles popular among non-elites. That street-level visibility and the unease it provoked pushed medical practitioners to draw hard lines. Croll tried to rebrand the Paracelsian Xenaxton by using the term pentacle, but his French translator simply deleted the word. Unser condemned it as a Trojan horse by which the works of demons was smuggled into medicine, while Argentine rejected the term outright as infernal. In different ways, all of them insisted their own practice was something else, an effort to protect medicine from the discredited, demonic baggage the word pentacle had picked up. The popularity of pentacles as textual amulets was real and visible in the 16th and 17th centuries. We can trace it not only in the frequent appearances of the term in manuscript and printed books, as we'll see later, but also in legal records and how-to manuals for church courts. Take Naples in 1602. Marcantonio Genovesi, canon to the archbishop, published his handbook that spells out what should count as heresy. There, he pauses over a very practical question. Should a person merely possessing pentacles be denounced? The fact that this even needed verdict tells us how common and how troubling this object had become at street levels. Let's read Genovesi's words. But what should be said about those knowingly hold pentacles, which nigromancers are accustomed to using? And the conclusion is that they should be denounced, for there is strong suspicion that they make use of them, as experience is often verified. From the way Genovesi frames it, pentacles could be merely held or actively used. He labels habitual users nigromancers, the term commonly applied to those who summon and command demons. His handbook draws a brief, if unstated, line between two groups, people who possess pentacles and nigromancers who put them to work. Given that pentacles often circulate as textual amulets worn on the body, the likely distinction is between an apotropaic object and a nigromantic instrument. The stakes were not theoretical at all. Genovesi recounts the 1599 case of a doctor of good reputation, whom the Sacred General Inquisition ordered to be tortured until he confessed his intent, belief, and use of pentacles. Evidence that this object, sometimes credited with warding off disease, also attracted learned medical practitioners and even doctor of good reputation. That popular, healing aura made pentacle a tempting word for iatrochemists and other medical practitioners. Sometimes their pentacles shared little with the nigromantic versions beyond the technique itself, a piece of matter engraved or written with signs. But the term's reach, bridging learned manuals and street amulets, posed a strategic choice. Either harness the trend by offering medical pentacles to clients, or give up the field and the world to necromancers and their diabolic arts. In a competitive marketplace, many practitioners, iatrochemists among them, chose to ride the current rather than swim against it. Among the practitioners we've met, acceptance of the term pentacle hinged on how its power was framed. If understood as vehicles of astral influence, it could be tolerated, even endorsed. If cast as demonic or superstitious, it was rejected. In that boundary walk, pentacle became an umbrella for distinct medical techniques, and a hybrid creature emerged at the edges, the planetary demonic pentacles. To see where this all begins, let's return to the earliest appearances of the pentacles. As we saw in the previous lecture, the earliest surviving Clavicula Solomonis instructs the magician to carry candarii, protective devices invoked for the protections of his body. By the mid-14th century, magicians were already treating candarii and pentacles as interchangeable. In that medieval context, pentacles had no astral dimension at all. They functioned as textual amulets and safeguards for the conjurer who summoned demons. Earlier candarii could take many forms and promise assorted benefits, but the clavicular pentacles are a fixed subset of those items with no celestial connotations. Astrology appears only marginally in the clavicula. Pentacles are made in the hour of Mercury on Wednesday with a waxing moon conjoined to the sun. Even this reads more like ritual timing than astrological principle. The text neither ties efficacy to celestial causation nor invokes planetary intelligences, inscribes astrological symbols, or selects materials by planetary correspondence. One might suspect the Wednesday rule encodes a hidden astrological rationale. It does not. The clavicula inherits it from an earlier Latin work which also begins the operation on Wednesday. The clavicula merely sharpens the instruction, not only Wednesday, but also to start specifically in the hour of Mercury, the ruler of Wednesday. The same temporal logic governs other preparatory activities, for example, consecration of the knife or preparing fumigations. This repetition signals ritual formalism and perhaps an astral facade rather than dependence on astral principles. Two shifts, then, mark the history of Solomonic pentacles. The second, I argue, tied to the medical marketplace and polemics over the term itself. Let's begin with the first. The 9 candarii of the earliest clavicula multiplied as additional amulets circulated. The Italian clavicula already lists more than 9 and distinguishes 2 sets, likely preserving an earlier layer, and later manuscripts present 12 candarii, also called pentacles, with specific virtues such as protection against enemies. This proliferation encouraged readers to treat them as amulets beyond their coercive nigromantic role. The second shift, in the late 16th century, replaces the older candarii with a new class of pentacles built on astral correspondences and celestial influence, features absent from the earlier clavicula. The word candarii fades, pentacles takes over. That astral turn shows up in explicit planetary assignment. Pentacles now are tied to individual planets and often grouped into 7 planetary sets. The taxonomy likely tries to corral a proliferating corpus over 40 pentacles by organizing them under the 7 planets. And the correspondences go further. Reframed on astrological principles, each pentacle takes on on its planets' qualities, Venus for love, Jupiter for wealth, etc. And each set typically includes a pentacle for commanding the planet's spirits, pushing the demonic practice of summoning and controlling demons toward work with planetary spirits. Materially, later practice tightens the astral link by allowing metal alternatives to parchment and colored inks. Make the pentacle in the metal of its planet, and the color rules fall away. For example, a pentacle corresponds to the sun should be engraved upon gold. The metal corresponds to the sun. There is no need to use parchment or ink in those cases. It's not just the theoretical framework or the technique that shift. The content does too. For example, angelic names start to appear in the pentacles, which track planetary ties. For example, a Mars pentacle with the angelic name Ma'adimiel, you can see it here in the square, from the Hebrew word for Mars, Ma'adim, and the angelic suffix El, so Ma'adim, Mars, and El, Ma'adimiel. Moreover, astrological symbols entered the pentacles through famous works like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's work, also called the Occulta Philosophia. For example, Agrippa's Jupiter seal appears in a Jupiter pentacle, and in the 18th century French The Keys of Rabbi Solomon, a Venus pentacle, explicitly called a talisman, packs Agrippa's first 6 Venus figures into a hexagram's angles with a flaming heart at the center that leaves little doubt about its function. It's Venus, right? These borrowings mirror Agrippa's growing popularity, of course, but also the greater attempt to strengthen the links between the pentacles to astrology. It is in this context that we should read Croll's Plague Pentacle. Let's return to it because it offers a vivid meeting point between astral medicine and nigromancy. A device engraved with a scorpion and a serpent prepared at precisely elected celestial moments. Scorpion imagery is common in the period, but the comparison with the Clavicular's planetary pentacle is striking. There, the scorpion pentacle is the only one in the set to adopt a zodiacal figure so explicitly. No other pentacle is this figurative, which strongly suggests cross-influence, though the direction still needs careful study. In the Clavicular, the scorpion pentacle is used to instill fear in demons, and its figures is justified by the scorpion's correspondence with Mars. The making of the pentacles also runs in parallel. Croll outlines a 2-stage process. First, carve the stamp, then press it or seal it into the prepared mass, both stages under specific astrological conditions. Likewise, the Clavicular's planetary pentacles, whether on metal or parchment, are not merely inscribed. They are ritually activated through consecration ritual. None of this should surprise us. The early modern medical marketplace had porous borders. Practitioners watched one another, borrowed freely, and sometimes used overlapping terminologies, as we saw. Even the word pentacle slipping into medical recipes is a sign of that blending. And we can also see it on the page. A pseudo-Paracelsian treatise, the Theosophia Pneumatica, was also called Clavicula Salomonis, evidence that not only techniques, but the Solomonic frame and fame itself migrated into Paracelsian circles. If the Clavicular Solomonis gives us as a kind of companion or auxiliary manual, a panoramic view of ritual practice, its pentacles, the central pieces of that panorama, became the canvas on which later generations wrote new worries, new know-how, and new uses. Their shifting shapes, materials, and inscriptions chart an ongoing conversation between necromancy, medicine, and learned natural philosophy. Tracing that conversation from the 14th to the 18th century, we've watched a term once tied to the coercion of demons get repurposed again and again to absorb popular, even fashionable elements, never quite losing its demonic afterglow. If the various kinds of breve show learned magic trickling into everyday life, the pentacles show the current running both ways. First top-down, then from the street back into the study, with plenty of sideways drift among different practitioners. Put simply, the traffic ran both ways. What began as tools for the Clavicular's demon-facing rituals, the candarii or pentacles, always had the potential of a small textual amulets ready for everyday use. Once they stepped outside the magic circle, they entered a medical marketplace already speaking the language of pentacles, which pushed magicians to revise, relabel, and expand their kits. The result was the rise of planetary pentacles, objects that could hang from a patient's neck instead of being shown to demons in complex and dangerous rituals, and heretical also. Medical practitioners, for their part, capitalized on the pentacle's name recognition while arguing over what it meant and whether it was legitimate. Some naturalized it as an astral or chemical medicine. Others condemned it as a Trojan horse for demonic art. In drawing those boundaries, they distanced themselves from necromancy and, paradoxically, helped the pentacle endure, now recast as a constellated remedy, a Xanax stone. In short, a demonic technology was domesticated for everyday use and made clinical. That domestication has had a long afterlife. Pentacles lifted from various clavicula now circulate in new age shops and online, stripped of demons and magic circles. Their ubiquity isn't a modern glitch, but the latest chapter in a history of strategic rebranding that began when medieval magicians equated candarii with pentacles, and early modern medical practitioners discovered a profitable, useful, and popular term. The paths traced here, ritual to medicine, demonology to therapeutics, and finally to popular practices, highlights boundary work that doesn't erase the past so much as negotiate with it. In that sense, the Pentacles remains what it was always been, a compact record of shifting bargains between different kinds of practitioners of different cultures and different beliefs. In our next and final lecture, we'll ask how Jewish practitioners read the Pentacles of the Clavicula Solomonis and made them their own. We'll focus on two figures, a rabbi and his student, who set out to write a practical handbook for making pentacles, and we'll see how the step-by-step method blends inherited recipes with their own innovations. Thank you.